Good evening, and on behalf of the World Jewish Congress and my two co-chairs, David de Rothschild and Shella Safra, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to a very historic evening. There have been many famous speakers in this ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria, but tonight, I think we have the greatest concentration of genius and achievement with George Shultz and Henry Kissinger in one room. Two secretaries of state, two men who brought freedom to millions and who left the world safer under their watch. Two men who made a difference and still do. But before I say more about George Shultz, I cannot let the significance of today's date go without comment. November 9th, 1938, exactly 77 years ago, Kristallnacht took place. Throughout Germany and Austria, Jews were beaten in the street, businesses were ransacked, and 1,000 synagogues were burned to the ground. It was called Kristallnacht because the moon's reflection on the broken glass in the streets made it look like crystals shimmering in the moonlight. A very poetic image for a night of terror. On the 50th anniversary of Kristallnacht in 1988, I thought it was important to remind everyone exactly what happened that night. So why now, 27 years later, is Kristallnacht still important? Because in 1938, the world said nothing. It did nothing. There was utter silence. 4 days later, Hitler held a meeting, and he told his staff that he could now do whatever he wanted to do with the Jews in Germany. Adolf Hitler clearly understood the world's silence. If you want to know when the Holocaust began, it began 77 years ago tonight. The World Jewish Congress was created in 1936 when a group of concerned citizens tried to warn the world of the growing threat, Nazi Germany. They were also met with silence. They were met with indifference, and the warning was ignored. In some ways, nothing has changed in 77 years. Today, there are thousands of Christians being killed. People are being beheaded. There are public slave auctions of young girls. In Israel, Jews are being knifed in the streets for the same reason that they were targeted in Germany, because they are Jews. An emboldened and much richer Iran still openly brags about the destruction of the Jewish state. Iran, a country that denies the Holocaust, is planning the next one. What do we hear from the world leaders? What do we hear in the UN besides denunciations of Israel? What do we see in the press now? Silence. Again, indifference. Again, appeasement. But tonight is different. Tonight is not about silence. Tonight we have a voice, and that voice is loud and clear and strong. Unlike in 1936, the World Jewish Congress today has tremendous influence. It gets the world's attention, and unlike 1936, our voice will be heard. Tonight, the World Jewish Congress honors a man who was never silent in the face of dictators, a man who worked hard to free people who were enslaved, a man who has always demonstrated courage, a man who has always been a friend to the Jewish people in the state of Israel. George Shultz represents the best of America. He has advised presidents like Dwight D. Eisenhower. He has held 4 different cabinet positions under 2 presidents. He was Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of State. George Shultz represents something we don't often see today, serving out of duty and not personal gain, and creating a foreign policy not based on politics or what was expedient, but what is right. That takes great courage. I know this firsthand. Almost 30 years ago, George Shultz was my boss, and he demonstrated this courage in a very personal way. In 1986, I was appointed U.S. Ambassador to Austria by President Reagan. Loving Austria the way Joe Cal and I did, we thought this was a dream job, but there was just one problem. We arrived right in the middle of the Kurt Waldheim affair. Kurt Waldheim was the Secretary General of the United Nations who left in disgrace because he lied about his Nazi past. The Austrians answered this by electing Kurt Waldheim president. As U.S. Ambassador, I was expected to attend Kurt Waldheim's inauguration. I thought it was important not to go. The State Department was not happy about this decision. But there was one person who stood by me. His name was George Shultz, and he was the Secretary of State. George Shultz understood that would send a message to Austria and the rest of the world, and he agreed with the message. In the 1980s, he and President Reagan personally fought to help Jews leave the Soviet Union. Why would the President of the United States and his Secretary of State spend political capital to help Jews in a far-off country that nobody else cared about? Because they believed in the basic right of freedom. George Shultz always saw the world through clear eyes. His concern for the Jewish people in the state of Israel also came from a very personal experience. Back in the 1960s, when he was Dean of Students at the University of Chicago, he and his wife had students over to their house every week. There was one student that stood out. His name was Joseph Levy. There was something special about him. George Shultz thought that Joseph Levy would do great things, that one day he would be a leader. But in the spring of 1967, Levy suddenly left school. And almost as soon as George Shultz heard that the Six-Day War had started, he heard that Joseph Levy was dead. He was a reserve tank commander in the IDF and was killed on the opening hours of the war. George Shultz looked at Israel differently because of Joseph Levy. And he wondered, I'm quoting him, what kind of country is this that can command the loyalty of a brilliant young man like this? At a time when many world leaders have turned against Israel, George Shultz has never done this. At a time when world leaders seem afraid to stand up to tyrants, George Shultz never has. It's because of his unique leadership that the World Jewish Congress honors him tonight. One of the reasons I'm involved in Jewish causes and why I became president of the World Jewish Congress is a very simple answer. I did not want someone years from now to say, why didn't people in 2015 see the writing on the wall? Why didn't they do something? Why were they silent? There is one important fact that everyone in this room must remember. We are not the Jews of the 1930s. We have power, we have influence, and we have a Jewish state that is strong and smart and is not going away. All of us must never be silent. And if you need to look for examples, just look at the two men who are with us tonight. Two men who were never silent in the face of evil or injustice or terror. Let's all take a lesson from George Shultz and Henry Kissinger. It's a lesson that's as old as the Bible and as clear as our Bill of Rights, that all people should be treated equally. All people should be allowed to practice their religion. No one should live in fear. And perhaps most important of all, freedom is worth fighting for. These words sound so simple, yet they are so important. Freedom is worth fighting for. It must always be defended. And we can never, never be silent. Thank you, George Shultz, for showing us the way. Thank you, Henry Kissinger. God bless you both, and may God continue to bless the United States of America and Israel. Thank you.